Keith was 36 years old, a man whose hands told the story of his life. Calloused and sure they could diagnose the subtle hum of a failing HVAC compressor from 10 feet away. He earned $58,000 a year, a solid, honest living coaxed from the Atlanta heat. His world was his 2012 Toyota Camry, with 187,000 miles on the odometer, his small but meticulously kept bungalow in College Park, and the two women who lived inside it, his wife Vanessa and their 7-year-old daughter Zoe. On the afternoon of his 10th wedding anniversary, a day that began with a quiet promise in his heart, he would learn that the entire decade had been built on a foundation of lies, and his world was about to be demolished. He had left work 2 hours early, a rare indulgence that cost him $100 in overtime but felt worth $1 million. In the passenger seat of his Camry sat a bouquet of 24 blood-red roses, a $65 extravagance he justified with the milestone. 10 years. An entire decade of building a life. He remembered their first apartment, a cramped one-bedroom off Cheshire Bridge Road, where they'd eaten takeout on cardboard boxes and dreamed of a future that looked exactly like this. A house with a small yard, a child's laughter echoing from the back porch. He had no idea what was coming. What do you think is the most painful kind of betrayal? Is it the sudden shock? Or the slow realization that the person you loved never really existed? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and let's see how Keith's story unfolds. Their life to Keith was a portrait of hard-won normalcy. Mornings began at 5:30 a.m. with the quiet click of his $89 Timex watch on the nightstand. While Vanessa slept in, her silk eye mask a permanent fixture, Keith would move through the silent house. He'd pack Zoe's lunch, a turkey sandwich, apple slices, a small bag of goldfish crackers, and a note written on a napkin. "Have a great day, my little star. Love, Daddy." He'd check the filters on their home's HVAC unit, a professional habit, ensuring the air his family breathed was clean. Theirs was a home built on his labor. The mortgage on the 1,400-square-foot bungalow was $1,280 a month, a payment he never missed. He'd personally laid the $2,000 worth of sod in the backyard for Zoe to play on. He'd spent a month of weekends building her a swing set from a $450 kit he'd bought at Lowe's. His hands raw, but his heart full as he watched her first flight toward the sky. Vanessa's world was different. She worked in marketing, a job that seemed to involve more lunches and networking events than actual desk time. Her salary was a vague figure she rarely discussed, but her expenses were crystal clear. She favored brands he'd only heard of in magazines. A $2,400 Burberry dress for a conference. A $1,800 Louis Vuitton handbag she called an investment. Her car, a white BMW 3 Series, was a $43,000 lease he'd co-signed for. The $650 monthly payment, a constant tight knot in their budget. "It's about projecting success, Keith," she'd say, her voice smooth and dismissive when he'd gently question a credit card bill that topped $3,000. "You have to spend money to make money. It's a language people in my world understand." He didn't understand the language, but he understood her, or he thought he did. He saw her ambition as a fire that complemented his steadiness. He was the foundation. She was the beautiful facade. He worked with his hands so she could shake the right ones. He believed in her. When she'd come to him 4 years ago, her eyes wide with excitement about a once-in-a-lifetime investment opportunity, he hadn't hesitated. It was a tech startup. A friend of a friend, she'd explained, was building an app that would revolutionize something. The details were hazy, full of jargon like synergy and scalability. What was clear was the amount, $40,000. It was the exact sum his mother, his beloved mama, had left him when she passed. That money was meant to be the start of Zoe's college fund. "Keith, this isn't just an investment in a company," Vanessa had argued, her hand on his arm, her nails perfectly manicured. It's an investment in us, in our future. This friend, Julian, he's brilliant. The projections are insane. We could turn this 40,000 into 500,000 in 5 years. Imagine what that would mean for Zoe. He'd looked at his daughter, then 4 years old, her bright brown eyes full of trust as she colored at the kitchen table. He imagined giving her everything, a life without the worries that perpetually shadowed his own thoughts. He'd transferred the money. Over the next 4 years, there were more investments. A bridge round of $25,000 from their savings. Another $50,000 from a home equity line of credit he'd reluctantly agreed to. Each time, Vanessa was the passionate advocate, armed with sleek brochures and confident assurances. "It's just temporary liquidity, baby," she'd say, kissing his cheek. "The big payout is coming. You just have to trust me." He trusted her. He saw her long hours, her frequent business trips to Miami and New York, as sacrifices for their family. He'd handle Zoe, the school runs, the bedtime stories, the scraped knees. He was the rock. He was proud to be her rock. He just didn't realize she was systematically grinding him down to dust. The rain started at 3:41 p.m., a sudden Atlanta downpour that slicked the roads and blurred the world outside his windshield. Keith pulled into his driveway on Oakmont Drive at 3:47 p.m. Vanessa's BMW was there, which was a surprise. Her calendar had said networking lunch Buckhead until 5 p.m. He smiled. It was perfect. She'd come home early, too. Fate. He cut the engine and grabbed the roses from the passenger seat, the heavy scent of the blooms filling the car. He felt a tremor of nervous excitement, the same feeling he'd had on their first date a decade ago at a small cafe on Edgewood Avenue. He imagined her surprise, her smile that could light up a room. He walked up the stone path he'd laid himself, fumbling for his keys. The front door was unlocked. He stepped inside, the cool air of the house a welcome relief. The bungalow was quiet. "Vanessa?" he called out softly, not wanting to spoil the surprise. No answer. He heard a low murmur of voices coming from their bedroom at the end of the hall. She must be on a call. He tiptoed down the hallway, the worn oak floorboards groaning softly under his work boots. The bedroom door was slightly ajar. He peeked through the crack, ready to burst in with the flowers and a wide grin. But the scene inside froze him. Vanessa was standing by the window, her back to the door. Her phone was on the dresser, on speaker. A man's voice, smooth and confident, filled the room. "So the final tranche from the Series A investors comes through next week," the man was saying. "Another $2 million. We're golden, baby." "Oh, Julian, that's incredible." Vanessa's voice was giddy, a tone he hadn't heard in years. It was light, unburdened. "I knew you could do it." "We did it," the man corrected. "Your little contributions kept the lights on for the first 2 years. That $189,000 was the lifeblood." $189,000? The number slammed into Keith's chest, knocking the air from his lungs. It was a figure of impossible scale. It was his mother's inheritance, their savings, the equity from their home. It was Zoe's future. "Well, my husband's contributions," Vanessa said, and then she laughed. It was a sharp, cruel sound. "God, he is so wonderfully simple. He still thinks my business trips are for my actual job. He has no idea I've been in your loft in Buckhead half the week." The $410,000 loft Julian had bought last year, the one she'd described to Keith after a networking event there, marveling at the floor-to-ceiling windows and the view of the city. Glass towers, a world away from their small bungalow. Keith's hand, holding the roses, began to tremble. The thorns pricked his palm. "Doesn't he ever get suspicious?" Julian's voice asked. "Of what? That I'm cheating on him? Please." Vanessa's tone was dripping with disdain. "He works with his hands, Julian. He smells like coolant and sweat when he comes home. He thinks romance is remembering to take out the trash. He's stable, predictable, a good father. That's his purpose. He provides the cover story. The words were like physical blows. Each one landed with sickening precision. Simple, predictable, cover story. The foundation of his world wasn't just cracked, it was a void. Then came the final fatal strike. I feel a little bad for him sometimes, Julian said, a mock pity in his voice. The poor guy must really love you. Vanessa was silent for a moment. Keith held his breath, a desperate, foolish part of him praying she would defend him, defend them, defend the 10 years of his life he had poured into her. Love him? She said, her voice flat, devoid of all emotion. God, no, I never loved him. He was just convenient. The world went silent, the sound of the rain, the hum of the refrigerator, the beat of his own heart. It all vanished. There was only that sentence, hanging in the air of the home he had built. I never loved him. He looked down at the $65 roses in his hand. The vibrant red seemed to mock him, a cheap symbol for a love that had never existed. Slowly, carefully, he backed away from the door, his movements robotic. He turned and walked back down the hall, each step an agony. He placed the roses on the kitchen counter, their beauty now grotesque. He pulled his phone from his pocket, his fingers clumsy. He opened the voice memo app and pressed record. Then he walked back to the bedroom door and stood there, silent and unseen, as his wife and her lover discussed the intricate details of their 4-year-long betrayal and the financial ruin they had orchestrated together. He recorded for 12 minutes and 47 seconds. Every lie, every laugh, every dollar amount captured in pristine digital clarity. When he finally walked out the front door and back into the rain, he was a different man. The husband was gone. In his place was a strategist. The next few weeks were a masterclass in deception, a quiet, brutal performance that hollowed Keith out from the inside. He had to become the man Vanessa described, simple, predictable, unseeing. It was the hardest job he'd ever had. Every smile was a lie. Every shared meal was a stomach-churning ordeal. Every night, lying next to her in the bed they'd shared for a decade, was an exercise in pure, cold control. The first test came that very evening. He had disposed of the roses, burying them at the bottom of the trash can under coffee grounds and eggshells. He'd returned to the house at his usual time, 6:15 p.m., feigning a weary sigh as he dropped his keys in the ceramic bowl by the door, a $15 piece of pottery Zoe had made for him. "Hey," he said, his voice carefully neutral as he walked into the kitchen where Vanessa was scrolling through her phone. "Rough day?" she asked, not looking up from the screen. "The usual," he said. He leaned in to kiss her cheek, a familiar gesture that now felt like swallowing glass. Her skin was cold. "Happy anniversary." She finally looked up, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. It was clear she'd forgotten. "Oh, right. Happy anniversary, baby." She gave him a quick, dismissive kiss. "I was so swamped today. I'm sorry I didn't get you anything." "It's okay," Keith said, and the lie was so profound it almost choked him. "We can celebrate this weekend." He was playing a part, and the audience of one had no idea the show was for her. He saw everything differently now. The past was no longer a collection of warm memories. It was a crime scene, and he was the forensic investigator. He remembered a conversation from 2 years ago, an argument, really. He'd noticed a $15,000 withdrawal from their joint savings account. "It's for the investment, Keith," she'd said, her tone impatient, as if explaining something to a child. The scene played out in his mind with chilling clarity. They were in the living room, the glow of the television, casting long shadows. Julian needed another round of funding to secure a key developer. This is how venture capital works. It moves fast. But you didn't tell me, he'd said, his voice small. That's a lot of money, Vanessa. And you think I don't know that? She'd snapped. I'm the one with the financial acumen here. You fix air conditioners. I build wealth. Just let me do my job, and you do yours. She'd turned back to her laptop, a sleek $2,200 MacBook, effectively ending the conversation. At the time, he'd felt ashamed of his ignorance, of his small-minded worrying. Now he saw it for what it was, a calculated dismissal, a verbal pat on the head while she picked his pocket. Another memory surfaced. A company dinner for her marketing firm last Christmas at a high-end restaurant in Midtown. He'd worn his best suit, a $400 ensemble he'd bought at Men's Warehouse. He felt clumsy and out of place among her colleagues in their expensive tailored clothes. Vanessa had introduced him to her boss, a slick man with a gold watch. "This is my husband, Keith," she'd said. "He works in facilities management." The euphemism stung. He didn't manage facilities, he fixed them. He climbed into sweltering attics and navigated cramped crawl spaces. It was hard, honest work. Her rebranding of it felt like she was ashamed. Later that night, he'd overheard her talking to a coworker. "It must be different," the coworker said. "Being with someone so grounded." Vanessa had laughed, that same sharp, cruel laugh he'd heard on the phone. "He's my rock," she'd said, and the word was an insult. "He keeps me from floating away on a cloud of ambition." Now playing dumb, he had to endure these little cuts every day. One evening, Zoe ran to him, her face a mask of tragedy. "Daddy, my Barbie's arm fell off. Can you fix her?" Keith smiled, a genuine smile for his daughter, the only source of light in his darkening world. He took the $15 doll and headed to his workshop in the garage. "Of course, sweetie, Dr. Daddy is on the case." He had a special epoxy that could fix anything. As he worked, Vanessa appeared in the doorway, phone pressed to her ear. "I know, it's just so domestic," she was saying to someone, her voice low. "No, I can't talk. He's in the garage gluing a doll's arm back on. It's adorable and a little pathetic all at once." He didn't flinch. He just carefully applied a tiny drop of the $8 epoxy to the plastic joint, his hand steady. He was no longer the husband. He was the man in the garage, gathering evidence, meticulously gluing his case together, while the woman in the house had no idea she was living on a demolition site. The most difficult part was Zoe. She was the epicenter of his love, the reason for his restraint. He had to shield her from the coming storm. He redoubled his efforts, pouring all his real, untainted love into her. He made her pancakes shaped like dinosaurs. He read Where the Wild Things Are with all the monster voices. He tucked her in at night, his heart aching with the knowledge that her world was about to be broken. One night after he'd kissed her goodnight, she whispered, "Daddy, why does Mommy go on so many trips?" The innocent question was a dagger. He smoothed her hair, the beautiful coils soft against his rough fingers. "Mommy's job is very important, sweetie. She has to meet a lot of people to help her company grow." It was a half-truth, the most he could manage. He had to maintain the facade, for Zoe's sake. He found his strength in small acts of rebellion. While Vanessa was on a 3-day conference in Miami, which he now knew was a trip to Julian's South Beach condo, Keith made his first move. He opened a new bank account in his name only. He set up a post office box. He started redirecting his paychecks there. It was a small step, but it was a start. He was building a lifeboat while the ship was still, to all outward appearances, sailing smoothly. He was playing the long game, a quiet, surgical demolition. And the first charge had just been set. The second charge was set in a sterile 4th-floor office in downtown Atlanta. The name on the frosted glass door read, "Adebayo and Associates, family, and financial law. The air inside smelled of paper and quiet competence. Femi Adebayo was a sharp, elegant black woman in her late 40s, her hair in intricate locks adorned with silver beads. She listened to Keith's story without interruption, her expression unreadable. He played the 12-minute recording for her. He watched her face as Vanessa's voice filled the quiet office, mocking him, dismissing him, confessing to a love that never was. When the recording ended, Ms. Adebayo was silent for a long moment. She took a slow sip of water from a glass on her mahogany desk. "Mr. Miller," she finally said, her voice calm and firm, "she didn't just break your heart. She and her partner have committed systematic, long-term fraud. This isn't just a divorce. This is a recovery operation." The words sent a shock of validation through him. He wasn't just a cuckolded husband. He was a victim of a crime. "My retainer is $5,000, Ms. Adebayo stated. "We will also need to hire a forensic accountant. I recommend Marcus Thorne. He's the best in the city. His retainer will be $4,500. Our combined hourly rate will be $1,200. Can you manage that?" Keith nodded, the numbers barely registering. He would sell his truck. He would cash in his small 401k. He would do whatever it took. "Yes," he said, his voice hoarse. "Good," she said, a flicker of a smile on her lips, "because we are not just going to divorce her. We are going to dismantle the entire fraudulent enterprise she helped build with your money." The next month was a blur of covert operations. Marcus Thorne, the forensic accountant, was a quiet man with eyes that missed nothing. From a small rented office space that cost Keith $400 a month, they began to build their case. They subpoenaed bank records under a shell company Ms. Adebayo created. The documents arrived in thick manila envelopes, and what they revealed was staggering. It wasn't just the big investments Keith knew about. It was a death by 1,000 cuts. A constant stream of money flowing from their joint accounts to Vanessa's personal credit cards, then paid to entities with innocuous names like Venture Logistics or Apex Consulting. Marcus traced them all. They were shell corporations, registered in Delaware, that funneled the money directly into Julian's startup, ConnectSphere. There were hundreds of transactions, a $2,500 charge for conference fees that ended up in Julian's account, a $5,000 marketing expense that paid for the deposit on the Buckhead loft, a $1,200 payment for web services that matched a receipt for a weekend at the St. Regis Atlanta. It was all there, a 4-year digital trail of theft and betrayal. The grand total was not just the money Keith knew he'd lost. With all the smaller, disguised transactions, Marcus calculated the final number, $189,451.22. "She was clever," Marcus said, pointing to a flowchart he'd created on a whiteboard. "She mixed personal expenses with the investment transfers. A $300 spa day here, a $1,500 plane ticket there. It was designed to look like the high-flying lifestyle of a successful executive, but it was all bankrolled by you and routed to him." While Marcus traced the money, Keith continued his performance at home. He learned to read Vanessa's moods, to anticipate her lies. He installed a keylogger on the family computer, a piece of software that cost $79, and captured every keystroke. He read her emails to Julian, filled with saccharine pet names and complaints about her boring home life. "Can't wait to get out of this stifling little house and back to you," one email read. "Keith is planning to repaint the bathroom this weekend. The excitement is almost too much to bear. LOL." Each word was another piece of evidence, another brick in the wall he was building around her. He copied every email, every text message he could get from her unlocked phone, and uploaded them to a secure cloud drive. The final piece of the puzzle was the investors. Ms. Adebayo's team did a deep dive into ConnectSphere. They discovered the lead investor was a powerful venture capital firm, Sterling Thorn Capital. They were known for their aggressive due diligence. They were sold a lie, Ms. Adebayo explained during a strategy meeting. Julian likely presented your stolen money as friends and family seed funding. He created a false narrative of early belief in his product. When Sterling Thorn finds out their entire investment was predicated on fraud and marital theft, they will not be pleased. They will have a fiduciary duty to their partners to claw back every penny and likely pursue legal action to make an example of him. The plan was set. It was surgical. As the temperature of the operation demanded, it would be a coordinated strike. On a specific day, at a specific time, 2 packages would be delivered, one to Vanessa, one to Sterling Thorn Capital. The night before the strike, Keith tucked Zoe into bed. She was holding a small beaded bracelet she had made at school. "This is for you, Daddy," she whispered, her voice sleepy. She climbed out of bed and walked over to his worn leather toolbox sitting by his dresser. She carefully looped the bracelet around the handle. "So you can think of me at work. You're my hero." Keith knelt and hugged her, burying his face in her hair. He felt a tear escape his eye, the first he'd allowed himself to shed in months. It wasn't a tear of sadness, but of resolve. He was her hero, and heroes protect their family. Tomorrow, he would save his. Have you ever had to put on a brave face while your world was falling apart? It's one of the hardest things a person can do. Share your story of strength in the comments, because your experience might just give someone else the courage they need. The day of the strike was a Tuesday, October 19th. The sky over Atlanta was a brilliant, cloudless blue. Keith woke up at 5:30 a.m., his movements precise and calm. He made Zoe's lunch. He drank his coffee. He kissed his daughter goodbye as she ran for the school bus, her backpack bouncing. He looked at the beaded bracelet on his toolbox. "You're my hero." Vanessa was in a flurry of activity. She was wearing an $8,700 Armani suit, a new purchase she'd claimed was for a crucial investor meeting. "It's a huge day, Keith," she said, applying a final coat of expensive lipstick. My colleague, is closing the Series A funding. This could be it, the big one." "That's great," Keith said, his voice even. He adjusted his simple work shirt, the logo of his HVAC company stitched on the chest. The contrast between them was a chasm, her $8,700 suit next to his $89 Timex watch. "Knock 'em dead." She gave him a distracted peck on the cheek and rushed out the door, the engine of her BMW roaring to life. He knew exactly where she was going, not to a sterile boardroom, but to a celebratory lunch with Julian at Aria in Buckhead, a restaurant where the tasting menu cost $175 per person. At 12:15 p.m., Keith sat in his truck in a parking lot a block away from the restaurant. His heart was pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against his ribs. He had his phone in his hand, open to a group chat Ms. Adebayo had created called Operation Takedown. At 12:28 p.m., a message popped up from Ms. Adebayo's paralegal, a young man named David. "David, Package A, delivered to Sterling Thorn Capital, handed directly to Mr. Henderson's executive assistant. He is their managing partner." The package contained a 200-page binder. It included Marcus Thorn's full forensic accounting report, bank statements with highlighted transfers, copies of Vanessa and Julian's emails, and a transcript of the recording Keith had made. It was a meticulous, undeniable narrative of fraud. Keith's hands were slick with sweat. He took a deep breath. At 12:30 p.m. on the dot, a second message appeared in the chat. This one was from the process server, a burly man named Rick. "Rick, subject served. Package B delivered." She did not take it well. Package B contained the divorce filing, a petition for full custody of Zoe, a temporary restraining order, and a notice of the fraud lawsuit that had been filed against both her and Julian that morning. The top page was a single sheet of paper showing the flow chart of the $189,451.22 flowing from Keith's life into Julian's company. Inside Aria, Vanessa had just raised a $30 glass of champagne. "To us?" she said, smiling at Julian across the table. "To the future." Just as their glasses clinked, a man in a nondescript polo shirt approached their table. "Vanessa Miller?" he asked. "Yes," she said, annoyed at the interruption. The man placed a thick legal envelope on the table. "You've been served." He turned and walked away without another word. Vanessa stared at the envelope, a confused frown on her face. Julian laughed. "Probably a subpoena for one of your old marketing campaigns." "Don't worry about it." She opened it. Her smile vanished. Her face, which had been glowing with triumph, went slack. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving behind a pasty, sick-looking mask. Her eyes scanned the first page, the fraud complaint. She saw the dollar amount. She saw Keith's name as the plaintiff. Her hands started to shake, rattling the champagne glass. "What is it?" Julian asked, his own smile fading. She couldn't speak. She just pushed the envelope across the table. He picked it up, and as he read, his expression mirrored hers. From confusion to disbelief to pure, unadulterated horror. At that exact moment, 20 miles away in a glass tower, Marcus Henderson, the managing partner of Sterling Thorne Capital, was looking at the same evidence. He wasn't horrified. He was cold with rage. He saw the reputation of his firm, his personal credibility, being tied to a sordid case of marital theft. He picked up his phone and dialed his head of legal. "Shut it down," he said, his voice like ice. "Freeze all transfers to ConnectSphere immediately, and get our litigation team ready. We're clawing back every single dollar." Back in Buckhead, Vanessa's phone began to buzz. It was a text from her bank. "Alert! Your credit card ending in 4821 has been suspended." Another buzz. "Alert! Your credit card ending in 9337 has been suspended." Keith had called the credit card companies that morning and, as the primary account holder, had her removed. Julian's phone rang. It was his bank. The multi-million-dollar wire transfer had been frozen, pending an investigation. His company accounts were locked. The lifeblood had been cut off. He looked at Vanessa, his eyes wide with panic and accusation. "What did you do?" he hissed. Her world was collapsing in real time. The waiter arrived with their appetizers, oblivious. The sight of the artfully arranged food, the symbol of the life she thought she had secured, made her want to vomit. She stood up, knocking over her chair, and ran out of the restaurant. Keith watched from his truck as she burst onto the street, her face a mess of tears and panic. She fumbled for her car keys, trying to unlock the BMW. The key fob beeped, but the doors wouldn't open. A final text message arrived on her phone. It was from Keith. "Keith, the car is in my name. I've had it remotely disabled. You'll need to find another way home." She stared at the message, then at the useless key fob, then at the imposing glass towers of Buckhead that had once seemed like a promise. Now they were just monuments to her ruin. She let out a guttural sob, a sound of complete and utter defeat right there on the sidewalk. Keith put his truck in drive and pulled away, not looking back. The demolition was complete. The aftermath was a cascade of consequences, each one a direct result of Vanessa's own choices. The quiet surgical strike had severed every pillar of the life she had built on lies, and the entire structure came crashing down with breathtaking speed. First came the voicemails. Keith let them all go to his phone, saving each one as a piece of evidence. The first was angry and confused. Left at 12:47 p.m., just minutes after she'd fled the restaurant. "Keith, what the hell is this? What have you done? My cards are being declined. You call me back right now. This is some kind of sick joke." The second, an hour later, was pleading. "Okay, Keith, baby. I don't know what you think you know, but we can talk about this. There's been a huge misunderstanding. Julian is just a friend, an investor. Please, just call me back. We can fix this." The third that evening was soaked in panicked tears. "They froze everything, Keith. Sterling Thorne is suing us." "Julian? Julian won't even answer my calls? He blames me for everything. I have nowhere to go. My key doesn't work at the house. Please, I'm sorry. Whatever you want, I'm sorry." But sorry was a currency that no longer had any value. The consequences enumerated themselves with brutal efficiency. 1. The money. The lawsuit from Sterling Thorne Capital was swift and merciless. They accused Julian and Vanessa of wire fraud and fraudulent inducement. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Julian immediately turned on Vanessa, claiming she had misled him about the source of the funds. The court placed a lien on all their assets. The $189,000 was gone, swallowed by legal fees and settlement costs. Julian's startup ConnectSphere folded within a month, its name a toxic asset. 2. The home. The restraining order was granted, barring Vanessa from the College Park bungalow. She was allowed one supervised visit to collect her personal belongings. Keith watched from the porch as she loaded a few boxes of designer clothes into the back of a $60 Uber. She looked small and lost without her armor of success. She had to move into a tiny, furnished apartment in Sandy Springs, a $1,300 a month space, paid for by her parents. 3. The job. News travels fast in the tight-knit Atlanta marketing community. The scandal of the lawsuit and the very public, very messy divorce made her radioactive. Her firm fired her, citing a morals clause in her contract. The woman who lived for networking was now an outcast. 4. The lover. Julian, in a desperate attempt to save himself, cut her off completely. He painted himself as a naive entrepreneur, duped by a manipulative woman. He changed his number and blocked her on all social media. The grand love affair, built on stolen money and shared contempt, evaporated the moment the money was gone. The $410,000 loft was sold to cover his legal bills. 5. And most importantly, the child. In the custody hearing, Ms. Adebayo presented the case with quiet, devastating precision. She didn't raise her voice. She simply laid out the evidence. The 4 years of financial deception, the diversion of funds meant for Zoe's future, the recorded proof of Vanessa's own admission that her family was just a cover story. She contrasted this with Keith's unwavering dedication as a father, providing school records, testimony from Zoe's teacher, and photos of a happy, well-cared-for child. The judge's decision was unequivocal. Keith was awarded sole physical and legal custody of Zoe. Vanessa was granted supervised visitation twice a month. The judge was particularly scathing in his summary, noting that Vanessa's actions demonstrated a profound and disturbing lack of judgment and a prioritization of personal greed over the well-being of her child. It was a total victory, but Keith felt no joy, only a grim sense of justice. He had not sought revenge, he had sought accountability. He had protected his daughter. That was all that mattered. The storm had passed, and in the quiet aftermath, he and Zoe were the only two left standing on the foundation that remained. A foundation built not of money or ambition, but of a father's simple, unbreakable love. 1 year later, the sun shone brightly over College Park. The heat of the Atlanta summer was just beginning to build, and the hum of a newly installed, high-efficiency HVAC unit could be heard from the bungalow on Oakmont Drive. But this time, the unit wasn't one Keith was fixing. It was one he had sold. The sign on the side of his new, clean work van read, Legacy HVAC, Quality and Integrity, Keith Miller, owner. After the divorce was finalized, the court had ordered the marital assets to be divided. But there were very few assets left. The house was his. The debt was hers. From the wreckage, Keith had salvaged a small settlement, just over $50,000. It wasn't the fortune Vanessa had squandered, but it was enough. He didn't use it to buy a new car or take a vacation. He invested it in himself. He got his master HVAC license, bought the used van for $15,000, and invested in $10,000 worth of the best tools on the market. He started his own company. His business was built on the principles he lived by: honesty, hard work, and fair pricing. Word of mouth spread quickly. People trusted the quiet, serious black man who showed up on time, diagnosed the problem accurately, and never overcharged. His income had nearly doubled, but his life had become simpler, richer. His evenings were no longer filled with a tense silence, but with the sounds of Zoe's laughter. They gardened together in the backyard, their hands in the rich soil. They did homework at the kitchen table. They had movie nights with popcorn and blankets. Their small bungalow, once a stage for a terrible play, was now a sanctuary. It was filled with authentic love. One Saturday afternoon, Zoe sat on the living room floor, drawing with a set of new crayons. She was focused, her tongue sticking out of the corner of her mouth. "What you making, sweetie?" Keith asked, looking up from a parts invoice. "It's our family," she said, her voice serious. She held up the drawing. On the paper were two figures holding hands under a smiling sun. One was tall, the other small. She had used a dark brown crayon for their skin and a black crayon for their coily hair. "See?" she said, pointing with a small finger. "That's you, Daddy, because you're big and strong, and that's me. We're black people, and we're a family." Keith felt a familiar lump in his throat. He took the drawing and looked at it, his heart swelling. It was the most beautiful portrait he had ever seen. He saw his radiant skin, his neat hair, and Zoe's, full of life, captured by their daughter's loving hand. This was his true wealth. This piece of paper was worth more than all the money Vanessa had ever stolen. He received a letter from Vanessa a few months ago. It was a short, stilted apology, full of therapy speak about her poor choices and lack of self-worth. She was working as a waitress, she said, and was starting to understand the value of an honest day's work. He felt a flicker of pity for her, but nothing more. He forgave her, not for her sake, but for his. He had to release the bitterness to make room for the peace he was building. He wished her well, from a great distance. True wealth is not found in a bank account, a stock portfolio, or a luxury car. It's not about projecting an image of success. True wealth is integrity. It's the trust in a child's eyes. It's the peace of mind that comes from knowing you've built your life on solid ground, with your own two hands. It's the quiet satisfaction of being a hero, not to the world, but to the one person who matters most. What does true wealth mean to you? Has there been a time in your life when you had to redefine what success looked like? Share your story in the comments below, and let's continue to inspire each other to build lives of true value. Thank you for joining us on Love Beyond Pride.